We are live. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Perspectives, third-party talk show with Bill Redpath of the Libertarian Party. Hello, Bill.
Howdy, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I'm David Rych of the Green Party. So we started this show in order to get some perspectives. Yes, it's quite accurate. On third-party politics and missions and goals and standards and beliefs and all sorts of things. Because obviously the mainstream media, who is just completely in sync with the duopoly, gives us very little, if any, time at all. So here we are. This is the opportunity. Today we were going to talk a bit about unions, labor, and what's going on with the UAW, and just economics in general. We'll see how far we get with this. So we can always tangent off to whatever we want because it's a podcast and we're allowed to do that. No corporate donors here.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, Bill, how you doing? We didn't get a chance to catch up before the show.
Oh, I'm doing okay, and man, nothing really new with me. Nothing really new with me, I guess.
Okay. Nothing terribly exciting on my side of the world. So, I guess we can get to it. All right. The UAW has, as of, I believe, 5 days ago now, issued a strike in some areas. What's that?
Something like that. Yeah, it's about right.
Like 3, 4, whatever. A few days ago, within the last week. How's that? That makes it safe. Issued a strike only in certain places. I know there's something going on in Detroit. I think that's kind of the epicenter of the entire situation. Though I heard other factories around the country have picked it up, but it's definitely not all of them. And obviously Bernie Sanders was there. I expected that. Give a very, political speech, and we got to see if our guy Cornel West is going to stand up and say something about it, because I know he's very pro-union. I know that they're upset that Biden's mediocrity and just sort of like meekness concerning, he claims to be such a great, pro-union guy, and then he doesn't do anything. And, or settles on a compromise that no union labor representative or anything would ever tolerate. So they're getting frustrated with him. But Trump even said he's going to skip the next Republican debate and go to Detroit. I don't know what he's going to say, how he feels. I know as a builder, he's done a lot with unions. Obviously, he's got to work with unions all the time. I've never heard him speak negatively about unions. I don't know what his personal... there's this kind of categorical sense you expect both Republicans to not be pro-union and all Democrats to be pro-union. It's usual. It doesn't work out that way. I know plenty on both sides that are pro and anti. Anyway, I would love to hear, because knowing a lot of libertarians, the issue of unions, almost every single one I've talked to were very pro-union in the private sector. Didn't like governmental unions very much, like the police unions and stuff like that. Because I don't know if it's because they're just sort of categorizing or compartmentalizing the two different sectors specifically, or if it's just because the ones in the government, like the police unions, got a real bad rap because, and rightly so, because they get these guys off for murder, literally, and people aren't having it. So, what are your thoughts as a libertarian or as a rogue libertarian on unions and the labor movement?
Well, I would have to categorize myself as not particularly pro-union. I definitely think public unions are the bigger problem, and I think they're a major problem in Illinois, quite frankly. I was opposed to the Amendment 1 that I voted no on that. It did pass last November, and we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. I don't think it's a good thing to have right to work banned in a state. It hurts the competitiveness of this state, in my opinion. But the real problem with public unions is the fact that, at least with this GM strike, GM, well, it's not just GM, Big Three, Ford, and what's the name? I didn't even know the name of Chrysler. Chrysler's name now begins with an S, and I forget the name of it offhand.
I didn't know that either.
There is a parent organization, Chrysler, Jeep, and another make of car is owned by
Subaru?
No. The name of the overall entity, it almost sounds like a venereal disease. The name of, and I guess they're not going to sponsor this program.
Sephora? No.
I was going to say syphilis, but that's not it. use your phone and come up with the name of the. It begins with an S.
Oh, that didn't tell me.
Well, in any event, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, but at least I learned that. But at least there are market forces that they have to answer to. That's not the case with public unions because they vote on they vote for the politicians into the office, and then they bargain with those politicians that they help put into office to get their salaries and benefits. So it's I think there's a real problem with public unions in the United States. And like I said, at least there is a market discipline process that private firms have to live up to, and labor unions have to be cognizant of that. I saw an interview, not live, but it was on CNN from the economist or expert from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Michigan, and he was saying something and that he does think it is a reasonable claim that if the unions actually got everything they asked for from the big three, they could bankrupt all three. And this fellow said he thinks that is a realistic possibility. They're not just blowing smoke, the companies, on this. But then the interviewer on CNN said, well, I mean, can't the companies just pass along these costs to the consumer? And well, if the consumer is willing to pay, the answer is yes. But if the consumer is not willing to pay, the answer is no. And you've got Tesla, which is non-union. You've got plants down south with other companies that are non-union, and maybe even those companies. Although I'm not sure about that. I maybe shouldn't say that. But in any event, there are market forces out there that push back against what unions want with in the private sector that does not occur in the public sector.
Yeah, no, yeah. And that's a lot of good points for sure. If you can't sell your product or service, then, nothing else matters.
Right.
Literally. And that's a fact. There's no doubt. That's, I don't know how else it would work. It doesn't make any sense.
That's right.
Supply and demand, but I obviously I'm pro-union, generally speaking. I don't think it's appropriate everywhere. But and I believe in the spirit of the law more than, spirit of the law over the letter of the law. A lot of unions think that you have to have like a formalized union. I say if the company already has like an HR or something that provides all the sort of protections a union would, then that's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's just called something different, right? Okay. But like I think one of the underpinnings of pro-unionism is just the notion of like labor rights and the ownership of your labor, that you own your labor. And not that the unions do not have to necessarily be anti-capitalist. I think that's false. That's a false assumption. And I even think that Marxist countries can be very oddly not union, even though they say they are, because unions are supposed to be about giving the work, about bringing democracy into the workplace. And a lot of like Marxist countries, they bring fascism into the workplace, for sure. But the notion of labor rights, I think, again, it's kind of an underpinning to this side of the position, in that people have the right to their own labor and the fruits of their labor. And obviously, when you go into a company to apply for a job, that's totally true in capitalism as well as in other systems, that you get to negotiate those terms with the employer, for sure. But remember, the labor movement started in like the early 1800s, severely. More like mid 1800s, and things were very, very different back then than they are now. Mm-hmm. And the business owners, the tycoons, if you will, were not treating their employees very well. So like the whole notion of organizing against that, I think was much needed. I think it was a moral imperative. And I think it produced a lot of good things that we take for granted nowadays. Now, I will admit before most other people that variables in their configurations within any given economic system change over time. And that's why, I don't mind this whole notion of like, it's not called a union, but you're really doing all the same things a union does. So I'm not going to go, I don't care. It's not merely about semantics. But I think labor rights are very important. I mean, what would you say about that?
Well, I think it's a matter of, I agree, but when when I go in, I've never been a labor union member. During my entire career, I've never joined it, and really given I was a white collar worker, I was an accountant and business appraiser. But when I went in, the deal was that I am paid a certain amount of compensation, most of it salary, and in my product, what I did was write reports that then the firm, my employer, owned them. So, I mean, I think that yes, I agree. People are entitled to the fruits of their labor, but that's sort of an abstraction. I mean, it's all a matter of bargaining. I mean, they can accept the terms of their employer, or they can go out and compete against the employer, assuming they don't have a non-compete agreement, and they don't have to sign a non-compete agreement if they don't want to. I did sign a non-compete agreement at one time with an employer, and I just accepted that. I really wanted to work at that firm, and I just accepted it was part of the terms and conditions. And if I didn't want to sign the non-compete agreement, I wasn't going to work there. And so it's I agree with the concept, but the devil's in the details, so to speak. And generally, what people produce as an employee becomes the property of their employer, and that's not improperly so.
Yeah, no, I mean, if that's what you negotiate, that's what you get. I agree. The UAW, as far as I understand it, is like some of what I've heard is from the strikers is that the CEO or somebody in the way higher up there got a 40% raise, and when he's already like a billionaire, and they're like, okay, well then we want a 40% raise because you can't have production without labor. And there is something, and I'm not a Marxist by any stretch, but he made some good points. I thought this was one of them. What he called hyper individualism, which is this notion to like put all the glory or praise on like one individual, when in fact a lot of other people were a necessary part of the process of accomplishing whatever it is we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Like saying Pharaoh Ramses II built the pyramids. No, he didn't. He might have said, okay, go ahead. And then he sat there and did nothing and got all the credit, right? I mean, it's that sort of thing. And Marx then, and even unionists and Marxists now, would say the same thing is happening with a lot of the CEOs or the higher ups in these corporations. It's not that they don't deserve more money than the rest. It's not that they have some sort of useless position. They're very important. But we keep hearing that like even the guys in the mailroom are necessary positions, but not important. And that itself is just a contradiction. If it's necessary, it has to be important. If it has to be there, it needs to be attended to. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that, again, there's skill, there's schooling, there's all sorts of other stuff. I get that. And I don't know any Marxist or socialist, well, maybe a couple Marxists, because some of them are just crazy, that believe everybody should get paid exactly the same amount no matter what. Like a doctor should make as much as a janitor. Again, there might be a couple who they're lunatics. But I think it's just the scope, the size, the vastness of the disparity between the ones on the top and the ones on the bottom. When the ones on the bottom or middle, say more accurately, are literally doing like 98% of the labor. And that's the power of striking. It's like, okay, you don't think that we're important enough to meet some of these conditions? And I agree that unions can go really overboard about stuff. I've seen it happen. Mm-hmm. But the point is like, okay, if you don't want to agree with us, if you think we're not important enough to do this for us, then we're just going to show you how important we are. We're going to stop working and your plant is going to shut down because we are necessary. But you keep treating us as if we're not. And it's the position, not the person necessarily. So that's my little rant.
Okay. Well, everybody's free to apply for the CEO position at Ford, GM. I mean, they can apply for it. They're probably not going to get very far. I agree that there are many instances, in my opinion, of salaries that are way too high in the executive suite, in my opinion. Yeah. I am a stockholder of I own one individual stock, and a weakness in that stock is that I think that the couple of top executives are paid too much, and that that may be addressed through board elections coming up. That's the way to take care of it, is for people to run for the board and say, hey, we're going to clean house in the executive suite here. And so, but there is a market out there for these positions, and a board, approves the contracts. Board's elected by the shareholders and approves the contracts of the and the compensation of the top executives. So I would agree. It at times the executive compensation seems a bit much, but I do think that the unions, particularly in this situation with the UAW, is they're asking for a hell of a lot, including a 32-hour work week. They want to be paid for a full work week, but only 32 hours of work.
I didn't hear that part.
Oh yeah, that's a part of it. And they also want to bring back, interestingly, and I would want them to come back to, frankly, is defined benefit pensions. That is not defined contribution, but defined benefit pensions, which really caused, I have a story. I remember when I was running for national chair of the Libertarian Party successfully in 2006, I was at a Libertarian Party of Michigan convention during the spring of 2006. And I met this man there who was no longer working at Ford, but at one time worked in the pensions department at Ford. And he knew the man who headed the pensions at General Motors. And this would have been, back in the mid 80s, I guess. I guess it would have been in the mid 80s. The head of pensions at General Motors told him, he says, 20 years from now, GM's going to go bankrupt. And by the way, the conversation started when this guy asserted to me, he says, GM is going to go bankrupt. And I'm sure I had a funny look on my face. And he said, this is 06. He says, GM is definitely going bankrupt. Well, it went bankrupt 2 years later in 2008.
Oh, wow.
And it was interesting, but he said that it was the pension. There are a couple of big problems in the union contracts. That is, first of all, the pensions were extremely generous, and that was the reason that this guy predicted bankruptcy 20 years in the future. By the way, the guy was wrong. It was 21 years, not 20 years. But
we'll let that go. That's pretty nice.
But in any event, but he said the other thing was work rules. That this is just the thing where unions agree to set up these, or bargain to set up these work rules. He says it just killed Ford. He said these work rules, he said literally it would take 8 hours. Something needed to be done. So, we need an electrician for this under the contract. We need a certain type of worker. He says, he asserted to me, and I have no way to check this or verify it. He asserted to me that it would take 8 hours to do what should take an hour and a half to do. It would take 8 hours due to the work rules and having to call in certain people under the union contract, things like that. So he had a very low opinion of the influence of unions on the major automakers. And but I think calling now they want, and I think they want to reinstitute health benefits for retirees. I think that's a part of it. I know defined benefit pensions is definitely a part of it, and it's a pretty rich contract that the UAW wants. And I read something. One other thing I read was that if they got everything they wanted here, the average wage cost would exceed $100 an hour at the big three. I heard that, and that's pretty steep
for that many workers. Yeah, that's a lot of money. I think this is probably a nice segue into like just a conversation about economics and different sectors of our economy, and like how they're the relation to the people, consumers, and to the government. $100 an hour for that many employees isn't sustainable. That's ridiculous. But and I'm just wondering, like, does the automotive industry get like subsidies from the government? Do you know?
Well, I guess so. I mean, first of all, with the electric vehicles, I mean, there's a huge tax credit. I want to say it's like $7,500 for buying an electric vehicle. I believe there's something like that out there. So that's a subsidy, a credit on people's individual tax returns. But it's interesting how I just read an article or a column about the labor union. I mean, there's an environmentalist movement, and this push for EVs from the Biden administration is making it tougher on the auto workers, and because these EVs are not as profitable, and they're not as good from an economic perspective for the labor union members as the gas guzzler. I'll call that's not the right phraseology, but I mean, gasoline powered, fossil fuel powered automobiles. But nonetheless, the environmentalists support the labor union, and the labor union supports the environmentalists, even though they have interests at odds here with each other. And it doesn't really make sense, but that's how it is right now, because the labor unions economically are hurt by the push to electric vehicles.
Yeah, no, the networking of these like different, areas of the economy or the socio-political economic systems, as they overlap and intertwine, can be quite complex, complicated, and distressing at moments. There's lots of people who like side with other sectors, if you will, other groups of people on one issue when they stand against each other on like four others. And it's always easy to point out because it's hypocrisy, and there's all sorts of problems there, and people don't like that, even though we all kind of do it. And I think another thing too is like, just I love and I hate Obamacare, because I love it because it gave people access to insurance, got rid of this whole stupid, pre-existing condition nonsense, and it holds the insurance companies accountable. I hate it because all it was at the end of the day is an insurance mandate. That's all it was. It puts a massive burden on the private sector, on businesses, to take care of healthcare. Why would a corporation or any sort of incorporation, a business, a small or big one, have to deal with your healthcare? What the hell does that have to do with them?
Right. Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, my understanding is it started in World War II when there was a wage freeze, and in order to compete for workers, somebody came up with the idea of offering healthcare. But yeah, I mean, the system is totally screwed up. I mean, in that regard, I mean, and it all comes back to the employer tax break. That is, employers, if they pay for health insurance, get to deduct the cost of the health insurance premium they pay, and the workers don't have to declare it as income. And this creates the attachment to work. If we had the pre-existing conditions thing, if you're an insurer, I mean, that's a legitimate thing to consider, certainly. But the thing is, if people had their own health insurance plan that was just tied to them, going back to when they were young, and this would be something that would stick with them for the rest of their life, you wouldn't have this pre-existing condition situation nearly to the extent that it's an issue now. Right. So it just trying to get, but it's going to take major political change to throw off the yoke of this system with employee health insurance tied to employers. I don't know how we're going to get out of it, but it's going to take some real political will.
Well, I think I'll just call it a rigged market, because the government comes in and rigs it. You just see parts of the economic landscape start collapsing. All of a sudden, like, insurance companies can't afford to pay it, say. Mm-hmm. So like, all right, well, I guess you're going to make us do it, and we can't. So what do? We go out of business.
Right. Well, they pulled out of certain states.
They move.
They pull out of certain states and say, we're not going to insure. It's not just health insurance, but property insurance in particular. There was was it State Farm? Somebody pulled out of California, I forget. But there was some states just say, or some insurance companies just say, that's it. We're not doing business, or we're not doing certain lines of business in certain states because it's just not economically feasible.
Right. Now, I don't know if this ties in directly, but as an example of insurance companies moving from California and Florida because of a lot of the land damage and home damage and so on, you're seeing some insurance companies vacate both of
Mhm.
those states. And again, I don't know if it's because of regulations or not. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But I just that they easily can do that is a very true thing,
Mhm.
very real thing. And so, but like, okay, for example, as these companies are leaving Florida, the people left behind, abandoned, neglected by those companies, um, have to get state insurance. Like they have to by law. I mean, they have to be covered somehow, some way because
Well,
all the damage done. Go ahead.
that I don't know the details about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then they find that and they become okay with it. It's just, and then they become reliant on it. I don't know what's going to happen if any more insurance companies are going to come in and pick up the slack. If the ones that remain behind are going to pick up the slack, how that works. The whole thing is such a mess. Let me ask you this: do you have like a vision, an image in your head of how it would look like if they didn't have any government regulation? Like, how would healthcare be done in America or in a country with like a truly free market? What would it look like?
I think that you would have health savings accounts and combined with some sort of catastrophic insurance. I mean, the thing now is that particularly now I'm on Medicare, all right, and I'm not paying. It's not true. I'm not paying for anything, but I'm paying for very little. It seems like just about all of my appointments doing this and that. I receive a bill for $15 every once in a while, but I think that we Nick Gillespie, who is with the Reason magazine, Reason Foundation, said that we need to get back to a point where if you can afford to pay for something, you pay for it. And I think that regular health care should be, it's just like regular maintenance to the car, or it should be paid for by individuals. Insurance should be real insurance to protect against very serious illnesses and provide catastrophic coverage. And I don't know. At the end of the day, there are people who've said that there ought to be a grand bargain where I mean, ultimately that the government steps in to handle truly catastrophic situations where people can't afford the health care that's necessary. I mean, strict libertarians will say no, we can't do that. But ultimately, to have some government backup is something that may have to be a part of a grand bargain. But for third party payers to be paying, I think it's in the high 80s, 88, 90% of healthcare expenses in this nation. That is completely out of control. It has led to a situation of opaque pricing. Nobody knows. If you ask, oh, how much does this cost? Some medical procedure. I mean, people think you're nuts to even ask the question, but it needs to be it needs to be considered. There are real economic trade-offs, but we need to get away from this situation where third-party payers are paying for nearly everything, and people ought to pay for their own regular medical expenses that they can afford to pay.
All right. Well said. And this is the only time that we'll be anti third party something is in the context of this conversation, folks, just so you know. This is about this. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think that some would respond to that as saying, yeah, that's not true. It's certainly the case that people should pay for their own way and not, just be as independent and self-purposed and driven as they can be. But the fact of the matter is but that's a should. That's like what people should be. The fact of the matter is that too many people won't, and that affects the other ones that are. So, like, I mean, there's just some people who are like, well, I'm not going to get insurance because I don't want to. And all of a sudden they get into an accident and they're bloody and disgusting and messy. And what would the doctors just say? Sorry, we're not going to cover you. You don't have insurance. Well, I mean, you just kind of can't do that. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, certainly I think a mandate for auto insurance. I mean, I maybe there are people driving around out there without, I don't know whether there are or aren't, but
No,
certainly, mandates for auto insurance, if you're going to drive, I think is only responsible. I mean, and things like people riding around without helmets riding motorcycles. I think that's between them and their insurance company. But if they don't have insurance, covering them riding around without a motorcycle helmet, then they damn well shouldn't do it. So I think that insurance agreements can regulate a lot of people's behavior, and should.
No, and that's actually a good point in favor of the market controlling this stuff and letting individual corporations deal with their own thing. Is that you can target it to more specifically to individuals or smaller groups of people that have like a similar identity or want a need of your said policy or whatever, your service. Like, why would if I don't have a motorcycle, why am I paying for somebody's motorcycle insurance? It's ridiculous.
Well, exactly. I don't ride a motor like a lot of people who do. It looks it looks fun, except when I was a little kid, I went for a motorcycle ride with a relative, and I didn't know, and nobody told me that the exhaust pipe was hot. And I brushed my leg against the exhaust pipe, and boy, I got a nasty little burn there that went away after a few days. But that one incident as a kid just sort of
you got the nasty little burn and a lifetime of negative association.
Yeah, exactly. So so anyway, so no, I'm not a motorcycle rider, and I'm a sedan guy.
You're a sedan sort of guy. Nice. Okay. Well,
that's
I have a motorcycle's license. I owned a motorcycle back in Portland, so this is over 8 years ago. Haven't owned one since. I do like them. I think they're fun. But I'm also not a speed freak like most motorcycle riders are. I go the speed limit, if not under a little bit. I like the drive. I like the vibe. I like the wind in my face.
Yeah.
I like to be able to look around and see. I know guys are like trying to get up to 200 miles. Like, you're out of your mind.
Oh yeah. I see people out and I know a lot of people who love motorcycles, and I'll take their word for it. That great experience, but I'm a chicken. What can I say? But I see
no
on Interstate 90, out here on I-90. I see motorcyclists sometimes and other places driving, looks to be 90 or 100 miles an hour, and I'm like, oh god, that's just that's not.
They're dangerous. The stats are there. They're dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this before. I don't think that I don't understand why Illinois doesn't have a helmet law. I mean, in a little bit, I kind of like that because there's so many different types of helmets and stuff like that. And you can get like a skull cap, like the old, like kind of like German looking one, or maybe something a little more politically correct. I don't know. But like you have like, wear over your eyes, you should be just the likelihood of being fine go up a lot. But to not have any head protection, literally, I mean, I've read the stats. It's like 37% higher chance of all sorts of problems.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a significant statistical rise in dangerous bad things.
Oh yeah.
You're almost at
40%.
I mean, you're approaching half. So yeah, that's crazy. I don't know what to do. But the point, going back to economics, the point being is like, why should any one or more people pay for any one or more other people's whatever it may be? And I think you're right. That's how it should be. But again, I've heard people say, yeah, but too many people won't. And it just puts a burden on the rest of us. Now we all of a sudden, like, we have homelessness, we have drug use, we have crime because they don't want to participate, and all sorts of other problems. So it's better just to have like this kind of blanket over everything and blah, blah, blah. And I don't agree with all of that, by the way. But but I understand the logic there that should's great. Should's a fabulous state of being, but is even more powerful. So
right.
I mean,
right. No, it's going to be, I mean, I don't know, for the people who don't follow the rules and injure themselves. I mean, society really shouldn't be paying if somebody doesn't have insurance for riding a motorcycle without a helmet. Society really shouldn't be paying for
your stupidity and irresponsibility. 100%. Yeah. Well, and I hope we can get there one day. So, I've told you 1,000 times, I would love to see the government go away. And I really believe that moral responsibility and accountability are the underpinning of making that happen.
Yeah. Oh,
Literally.
absolutely. I
If
agree.
you don't be an ass and be, be a good, decent, productive human being,
Right.
and on your own terms and in agreement with the rest of people, 100%, those both exist. We wouldn't need anybody to tell us what to do or to
Right.
shackle us in chains and put us in cages because we were being dumb.
Mhm.
So it's like every vision I have of how I see how the world should be. And I've gone through a lot of different iterations, but like they all seem to include like this massive emphasis on education. And by education, I don't necessarily mean school or public or whatever.
Mhm.
Like that you actually learn and individuate as a human being. I mean, that to me strikes me as very libertarian.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, education is extremely important for this democracy. We can't have, ignorant people go into the voting booth. The
God,
results
it's
are likely
it's just terrifying to
the
think about it.
results the results thereafter
Yeah.
aren't likely to be good.
No, they're not, and that's been shown many times. So actually, that's a nice segue, and then we can talk about like a specific sector of the market: public schools versus private schools. Now, I could probably guess your general opinion on the issue, but
Oh, no, I'm for school choice, undoubtedly. Yeah,
oh, okay, okay. I
I won't
apologize.
go as far. I mean, some people want to completely separate school and state, and that is that they don't want the state operating schools and they don't want the state financing schools, and that is, I think, a bridge too far for the foreseeable future. I will say one thing, though. I mean, I don't think the government has any business operating schools. You got to separate the operation versus finance question. I'm in
Oh, okay, yeah.
favor of so in terms of finance, some sort of universal tax credit or some sort of voucher program. The mechanics maybe a little too esoteric to go into right now, and I'm not sure. It seems to me in the past I proposed some sort of tax credit program to finance public schools, but I think the money needs to follow the students, and it's just the head of the Chicago Teachers Union, Stacy Davis, I think is her name, or Gates, Stacy Gates, maybe. But in any event, the head of the CTU. The news just came out that I think her oldest son, one of her kids, is going to a private school, and
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I
she's
heard
been
about this.
called out. She's been called out as a hypocrite because she
Yeah.
likes school choice programs,
Right.
and she says, well, I mean, first of all, she says, oh, this is the school choice is racist, which is not so. In fact, if it's so racist, why do African American families support school choice more than anyone else? But then she claims, well, it's the lack of resources. Well, I just saw a figure the other day where the budget over the recent past, I forget how many years offhand, maybe it's 5 years or so. I forget how many years, but the budget for the Chicago school system increased from 6 billion roughly to $8.5 billion, while enrollment dropped 40,000 students, I believe. And they're spending, yeah, like the per pupil cost of Chicago's public schools right now. I saw a figure of 29 grand, $29,000 a year per student.
Wow.
At Chicago public schools. So it is not a lack of resources when you're talking that kind of money and that sort of spending increase. No, look, competition makes us all better. I don't care what line of work, I don't care what you do. Competition makes people perform better, and that goes for educators as well. And it is of vital importance to this nation. I just read. I want to say the number was 1,310. I forget what it was. It was a combined SAT score that was in the 1,300s, I believe. They still score it, 200 to 800 on verbal and math. Add the two up, and it was something. I apologize. I forget the exact number, but it was in the 1,300s, I believe, and it said that 1% of Black students score this number or above on the SAT. 8% of white students scored at that number or above, and 25% of Asian American students
Right.
scored that number or better on the SAT. And it was, it was a high score, don't get me wrong, but you're looking at 1% versus 8% versus 25%. Something's wrong there. Something is wrong with the education of certainly that the Black students are receiving in our education system. If they're getting only 1 out of 100 are scoring that high on the SAT, while it's 1 out of 4 of Asian American students. So there's I think the public school system has done an incredible disservice to lower income students, in particular, families who can't afford to send their kids to private schools. And it's just right that they be subjected, that teachers and educators be subjected to competition, just like people in most other lines of work.
Well said. Yeah, no, there's definitely some sort of literally a systemic problem there. And I'm not gonna say systemic racism per se. Is like maybe it was back in the day that no, this is a residual effect. There were certain problems with local communities of minority persuasion, if you will, getting federal money to reconstruct their areas where other neighborhoods were. Anyway, but yeah, it is astonishing the disparity between those numbers. And I don't, but I mean, okay, so handing the whole thing over to say the private sector, something like charter schools or something like that, because the cost of private, the argument, in contrast to what you're saying, is that, well, fine, but private schools are like $50,000 a year, per student. Like, how are we supposed to do that? Go ahead.
Well, there are a lot of private schools that teach students for much less on a per pupil basis than what the public schools are spending. I admit that I have not watched something that's on my to-do list. As a matter of fact, let me write it down right now.
Okay.
There is a 3-part series that I've not watched called School Incorporated. And it was produced by the Cato Institute, and they had a education analyst named Andrew Colson, and Mr. Colson produced this School Inc. I'm pretty sure it's online. Unfortunately, Andrew Colson passed away several years ago from a brain tumor, as I recall. But I've heard it stated that it said, they say in this documentary, there are school teachers in South Korea that are so good at what they do, they make $1 million a year. All right, is what I've heard, and that's secondhand, but I think that's true, and I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. Probably maybe a good thing for us to do, David, is for some week we separately watch this, come on, talk about School Incorporated and what we learned in terms of education, but it's education systems around the world, is my understanding, that are covered in this documentary. And I just think that teachers, I mean, I know there's fear of the unknown, but I actually think the teaching profession would be so much better off in a competitive situation out there, and you get away from the school, the government operated school monopoly. I really think teachers as a profession would be better off in a freer setting than what we have now. And I don't understand why they fight to defend the status quo, other than it's comfortable for them.
Right. And I do know, my brother is he has a master's degree in linguistics, and he's a teacher, English teacher at a high school in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
And he loves doing it. Very intelligent person. And I was talking to him the other day, and he was talking about how they got a new principal in the school who was going to crack down on teachers, complying with state regulations. And my brother's about as in love with governments as I am. And he's telling me about how like per week, each student has to have 2 grades in the book over what was it, a 16, whatever. So let's just say 10-week period. It was something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's like, so really it's 20 at the end of the 10-week period. He's like, that's what it is. That's what everybody does. Nobody does it 2 per week, every single week. You don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
right? So he didn't one week, and the principal wrote him up for breaking state regulations. Yeah, I mean, like, just like that's one of the things that drives me batty about external forces determining internal structures and stuff like that. Like in this
Right.
case.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the state is paying for it.
So you better.
They're running the school. I mean, they can set the rules, but it's things like that it's just we don't need. In fact, we have way too much bureaucracy in the school system as it currently exists. So I don't. I'd like to hear a defense of that rule, but it seems kind of absurd to me. But I'd like to hear.
Yeah, no, and again, I mean, it's just the more I've said this before, the more complex a system is, the less of centralized, a structure or authority or whatever force is better.
Right.
So, stop with if too many parts break.
Yeah, but in dealing with government, I mean, at one time, I mean, I some of my libertarian friends may not like hearing this, but when I did business valuation work over 30 some gosh, I guess about 38 years, something like that. I several times I did valuation work for the Internal Revenue Service and wrote a report for them, and actually overall they were pleasant professional experiences. That I had some issues from time to time, and I wondered about the competence of some IRS employees. Not all of them, but some of them. I had some serious question marks. But the thing that so drove me up the wall was the procurement process. In dealing with so much easier getting a job, getting a project from in the private sector. You didn't have to go through the incredible procurement bureaucracy that you had to go through to get a project from the Internal Revenue Service. And then they had various security rules that were rather over the top, in my opinion. And they threatened, they told, we may send somebody to your office to make sure that, your office is locked and you've got a locking file cabinet there and all that. And I understand that they want to be secure, but they had these various, nobody ever showed up to actually put the security at my office. But anyway, it just, it's rules like that at times just seem so nonsensical and non-productive.
No, and they are often like it's a massive. Bureaucracies are generally not a good thing. Again, the less moving parts, the less problems you're going to have. And it just, again, drives me batty that just there's such an arrogance and pomposity, I think, about these far away, distant people thinking that they know better about the inner workings of these things than the people working in the things. It just, I don't get it. I never liked that. I don't like top down authority. I want bottom up authority, and that includes people like running businesses. But is that a kind of a principle in the Libertarian Party, the bottom up versus top down? Is that a thing that comes up or no?
Certainly there are people who promote the idea. What I would say this, that certainly libertarians are in favor of devolving government power downward, as far as close to the people as possible.
Right.
Better to have local governments make decisions that only localities, and not have it be done in Washington and one size fits all, all the way down to localities across the nation. So I would say generally that would be true. Yeah.
Okay. Another thing too I love about the libertarian side of libertarian socialism in my camp is just that it really does rely on the better aspects of human nature. I was thinking when we were talking about the schools and stuff like that, public versus private, whatever it may be. Let's say you took one day, okay, we're shutting down all the public schools. Do you really think there wouldn't be an outpouring of people to go and try to get classes going again for the kids, like that? Because it's children, first of all, and that tugs on everybody's heartstring.
Sure.
And you'd have immediate reaction, people. I don't know if it'd be wholly efficient. I don't know, but I can't imagine nobody would do anything. you
Right.
know, or not enough people would do something. I think that you would just be like, screw that. Okay, we know these kids need to go to school.
Mhm.
It's almost instinctual for human beings that your children need to be educated. Okay, you know, I mean, you know, that's, you teach them as parents. You're a teacher,
Right.
right? I mean, does that make sense?
Sure. Absolutely. No, I mean, there would be some sort of, you know, process. I don't know how long it would take
Right. I mean, yeah.
sort of come together, but certainly there would be education entrepreneurs out there who would, you know, come up with curricula
The
and
angel, like an angel investors and stuff like that. I don't know about the dudes on
yeah,
Shark Tank,
there would be people who would
but
say, all right, let's, you know,
right,
let's
who
get
would
a school together here and, you know, plan the you know, the curriculum for the various grades, and you just don't know. Here's the thing, is that you don't know what people are going to come up with. I mean, there is the, you know, creative destruction, so to speak, of capitalism. Deidre McCloskey said capitalism, I think she wants to call it innovationism. Maybe I'm screwing up that word, perhaps, but
No, that's
but
good.
permissionless innovation is basically
Permissionless innovation. Oh, I definitely like
basically the foundation of
that.
what capitalism is.
Right.
You'd have it would be interesting to see how schools would develop and evolve under a situation where you didn't have government operating schools anymore.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. I'm not going to hold my breath for it because I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
certainly would be. It's a fascinating thought experiment.
Mhm.
Something to like think about later.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that would go for a lot of different things. I mean, is there a general? I know, again, you know, Green Party and Libertarian Party share a very much an anti-war sort of stance.
Oh yeah.
You know, and rightly so. Anybody's pro-war is a crazy person. So I don't know why you'd want to be that, but I know, like, just doing research on, like, you know, pollution and climate change, because obviously it's a Green Party show. I found out that, like, the number one, you know, singular body of people, if you will, and all the stuff they have with them, that is the number one polluter in the planet, is literally the American military. Like, it pollutes more than any other singular military or even like economies do. It's unbelievable. It's a nightmare. And one of the perks of, like, you know, not wanting centralization and stuff like that is that kind of goes away too. Like, again, I, you know, my little vision of the world. Like, what would you say to something like that? Like the reduction of military in this country, as far as, like, not just, what would you say about that?
Well, we should get along with as little military spending as possible. I mean, it drives up taxes. You know, I mean, right now, I mean, there's no doubt about it. You've got a military industrial complex that constantly is striving for greater defense budgets. There's never really, and these people, I can't believe the cynical talk. Basically, the reason we need to be involved in Ukraine, oh, it's really a positive thing based on what it's, you know, how it helps military arms sales for American companies. There are people who talk that way, and I think it's incredibly cynical, and you know, hey, a lot of people think, well, you know, what goes on over there is okay as long as our boys aren't dying over there. Well, no, it's not going okay. It's not going well, and there needs to be, you know, some sort of drive to some sort of ceasefire. Perhaps there be partitioning involved. In terms of people in the eastern part of Ukraine that would prefer to be a part of Russia as opposed to Ukraine. But God bless. I mean, it's absolutely horrible when people justify involvement in war, or justify a war from the sort of the perspective, well, it's good for business here in the United States. That is horrible.
Yeah. If you've ever seen a Schindler's List, which is probably one of the most impactful movies I've ever seen.
Oh yeah.
I was in a band back then, and I actually wrote a song called "Through Oscar's Eyes," and it was a very dark, macabre sort of song. It was a good song, but yeah, it was all inspired by that movie. But, like, in the beginning, before he finds his conscience, you know, he's going into what he's doing because of profit. He's like, you know, that famous saying, "Why? What makes money?" or something like that. He's like, "War." You know, he's all, like, excited about it, and it's a very just messed up scene. You're like, holy cow, how can somebody think like that? Now, again, eventually he redeems himself, if you will. But a very, 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 very powerful movie. If you haven't seen it, please do. Yeah, no, militaries are, I mean, war is bad. And I think that we need to minimize. I understand practically that there are threats. You know, if we get rid of our military completely, we'll be some other culture by the morning. But you know, it's outrageous. What, we just like a F-23 just like disappeared in the ocean or something? Is that what I heard? It's like an $80 million jet.
80 or 100 million, something like that.
He's just gone. You know, and like I remember I've seen people in Hawaii after the fire about like the minimal, if not negligible, amount of money that the federal government is offering to help, you know, compared to the, you know, what is it, $80 billion we've sent to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not one of those people who thinks that Americans are somehow superior to anybody else in the world, but I do believe like it's kind of the adage of like, you know, who are you going to feed first, your children or the dude across the town's children? I mean, you're going to take care of your own people first. I don't like to be like that, but it's really a matter of like moral logistics. I mean, you start with what you can get to first, and you kind of expand outward when you can.
Right.
So like there's just the notion that like they, again, whatever it is, like $80 billion to a foreign country over a little spat. No, I don't want to minimize, but I mean, it's not like a major war. And it actually could escalate to that point if they keep doing so. That's another angle. Instead of like, you know, helping fix, you know, so your own citizens, your own people. Like it's just beyond me how they could do something like that.
Right. You know, it's a horrible situation, and I don't think that too many things. In fact, I just read I subscribed to David Stockman's Contra Corner and read his commentaries on this, and he just had a guest column by Jeffrey Sachs, and I believe he's a professor at Columbia, economics professor, and he wrote basically a chronological history of, you know, the situation regarding the Soviet Union and Ukraine going back, and all the broken promises from the U.S. government saying we're not going to move NATO east. Excuse me. And really, it's a lot of broken promises for the United States and other NATO allies that brought this situation. Again, there's no forgiving Russia and Putin for what they've done, but the various decisions by the United States and Western European nations, other NATO nations, definitely brought about this situation. There's no question. If they hadn't been reneging on various promises going back 30 years or so, this probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, it's like everybody, you know, again, like this sort of notion of nationalism is something I never got either. Like as soon as you hear about something like that your supposed country's enemy is, that they do it. It's all, everything they're doing is evil, wrong, blah blah blah, and there's nothing else going on. We're the good guys, and that's definitely a sociological problem. And the fact of the matter is, like you're right. Like I mean, NATO broke its promise like a gajillion times, and there are Nazis in the military and in the higher ups of guys called the Azov regime. There's actually a couple others, and they're very much Nazis. And Russia still has a good reason to not like Nazis. Okay, okay, so it's not completely without legitimate reason, even though, again, I was hoping that, you know, it could be solved a different way. I also remember, too, when Putin first came into power, he wanted to join NATO, and they said no.
You know, that would have been an interesting thing and probably a good thing, you know, frankly.
We'd all be on the same side.
Yeah.
You know, but he still thinks like they said no because NATO was designed in the first place to defend against the USSR.
Right.
And that he's like, you still have this mentality, and that's where the problem lies. He's like, I would love to join you, you know, but you're not letting me. And what do you want to do? I don't know. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that. I'm not saying Putin's a good guy because I don't like him.
No.
Okay, but I mean, we need to be fair. This is called perspectives for a reason. You need to keep it in its proper perspective. Okay, there you go. There's our motto going forth. All right, we're at the end, man. That was good. We made it. Very cool. All right.
We walked the high wire again.
That's right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Perspectives, third party talk show with Bill Redpath from the Libertarian Party. I'm David Rych from the Green Party. See you next time. Again, a slide to line.